So you said that you were alive during the Vietnam War. You want to talk about the draft?
Sure. The Vietnam War really started in the early 60s, and by the time I graduated from high school in 1970, it was pretty well going full blown, and the draft was in effect, and I went to college at the University of Maine at Farmington, and I had a student deferment, and all a student deferment did was put off getting drafted till you got out of college. So I decided to drop the student deferment and take what would come. And the draft at the time, they would have capsules with dates on them, and they would draw them. There'd be 366 capsules for every day in the year. And if your capsule was drawn first, you were probably most assured of getting drafted. If you were number 366, you probably were not going to get drafted. And my number come up 320, so I didn't get drafted. I had friends that did. I had a friend by the name of Eddie Dalloway who was killed in Vietnam. There was a lot of protests against the war at the time, and I remember seeing those on TV and seeing them in real life.
Do you want to talk about seeing the protests and the hippies and where you saw them?
Sure. My grandparents, my mother was born and brought up right in downtown Boston, and my grandparents had a townhouse that was about 4 blocks from the Boston Commons, which is a big park in the middle of downtown Boston. And we heard there was going to be a big protest in the park, my 2 sisters and I. So we walked down to see what was going on. And there was all of these hippies and these counterculture people and people carrying signs and so forth. And we were talking with them, and they seemed like really nice people. And then the policemen started to arrive, and they were mounted on horses. And we were talking with them, and they were really nice guys, and they told us all about the horses, and that some of them were actually retired race horses that had been donated to the police force for use of this. And my sister Evie, she loved horses, and so they set her up on one of the horses, and we were really pleased to be able to talk to them, and they seemed like a bunch of nice people. And so we walked off, and the protesters started chanting and hollering and everything, and all of a sudden the policemen all lined up on their horses, and they went charging right through the protesters, swinging their batons and arresting them and knocking them about. And it was quite a shock to some kids from Maine to see something like that.
Yeah, that does seem pretty shocking.
Yeah.
You said you had a great-grandfather that lived to be pretty old, too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anything that he had told you that you found interesting?
A number of things really interesting. His name was Forrest Libby, and he was born here in Corinna, and he died when he was 104. He died in 1972 is when he died. It was 2 years after your mother was born. He always told me the story, and I enjoyed hearing it. He had shook hands with a Civil War veteran when he was a young man, and the Civil War veteran had shook hands with Abraham Lincoln. And it just impressed me that I wasn't that far removed from what seemed like ancient history. That was really closer to us than I thought. The Libby family, in fact, has been in Corinna. My family has been in Corinna since the time the town was first formed in 1816. So we've been here quite a while.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that you had a great-grandfather that was pretty old. When did the family actually come to America?
Well, the Libby side of the family, I'm talking about my great-grandfather, they came from England, and they came out of New Hampshire. They emigrated from England to New Hampshire, the Portsmouth area, and then they came to Corinna in 1816. On the Condon side, we came out of Ireland, and we landed, there was 2 brothers who landed in the Brunswick area, and they stayed there for a while, and then they went up to Presque Isle, where they started potato farming. And that was around 1860. And they stayed there, the family, Condon family stayed there until 1917. They came to this area, my great-grandfather. And my grandfather was 17 at the time, and they moved to this area. And they had a large farm on the Exeter Road here in Corinna. During the Depression, just before the Depression started, the lightning struck the barn, burnt the barn, and they lost a lot there. Then in the Depression, everything got worse, and they lost the farm entirely. And my grandfather had a sister who was a pretty enterprising single woman for the time. She worked for the Bangor Rustic Railroad, and she had made some pretty good money. And she had bought a small farm in Newport just to say that she owned one. That farm was where Northeast Occupational is now, between the Williams Road and Route 7. It stood just about where that building is. And they all moved in together, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my aunt, and all of the children that my grandfather and grandmother had at the time, 7 of them, and they all lived in that little farm. Then, after the war started and money started getting a little bit better, my grandfather bought a farm out in Palmyra, and that's where my father grew up, and that's where I spent some of the best summers of my life, was on that farm working with my grandfather, haying and helping him tend to the cattle. And we had horses. We had 16 horses. We had over 100 head of sheep. We always had at least a dozen pigs. We had a couple of hundred chickens. It was an old-fashioned farm where we had everything on it. And I really, really loved that, and had some of the best times of my life there.
Oh, you mentioned something about you meeting your now wife, and you guys got married in high school. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Vaughn and I had gone to different high schools. Back then, there was Newport High School, and there was Corinna Union Academy, and there was Heartland Academy. I had gone 2 years to Newport High School. Mimi had gone to Corinna Union Academy. We met at Nokomis. It was my junior year and her sophomore year, and we started going out. And it was actually my freshman year in college, her senior year in high school. She found out she was pregnant, and she and I got married. It's just what you did back then. Abortions weren't available, so that definitely wasn't an option. There was no question. We were just going to get married when we found out about it. And it was hard. It really was. She just turned 17 when she gave birth. And the baby was awfully, awfully sick. She had to be operated on when she was 35 minutes old. And I remember we were sitting in the waiting room, and the doctors came in and told us that they had done all they could, but that the baby wasn't going to live through the night. And they told us that every night for 2 weeks, that she wasn't going to live through the night. They had her in an incubator, and we never even got to touch her till she was over a month old, because they were so worried about infections and so forth. But she did make it. You're living proof of that. You're here. Wouldn't have been if she wasn't.
Yes, I am. Did you ever think that getting married so young that you maybe wouldn't be able to make it?
Yeah, there was. In fact, we'd been married about a year and a half, and I was 19, and I did not want to be married anymore. I was just tired of it. So I went to my father and told him that I thought I didn't want to be married anymore. And he told me, he says, well, it's your life. You do what you think you have to do, but you leave, she stays. They were going to just cut me off at the knees. They were going to keep Mimi, and I was out the door. So I decided I better think about it. And, well, we've been married over 40 years now, so must be right.
Must be. Was getting pregnant in high school common back when that happened?
It was really strange. It hadn't, there might have been 1 or 2 girls per year prior to Mimi's senior year. And that year there was 7 in her class that graduated that had babies and husbands in the audience. And that was a high number, but then it was different. And don't know why.
Thank you.